Hey everyone, it's Gabe from Sonora, and today we're going to be tying a variation of a PsychoPrince. The hook in the vise is a Fulling Mill FM5085 size 14 Nymph hook. The bead is something a little different and new to the shop, is a Fulling Mill Tungsten drop bead. It's got like a little water drop or teardrop shape to it. Turns any hook into a jig hook. You don't have to use a jig style hook to make the fly right hook point up like other jig flies. We're also using stripped Goose Biots in amber. For thread, we're using a Veevus 10-aught in red. We're also going to be using some ultra wire in red in size Brassie. Also using two different colors of ice dub, one in Peacock and the other in UV brown. So to start this fly off, since it does have the odd bead on it, we're just going to go ahead and start some thread on the front of the hook here, just a little bit. Trim. I'm actually just going to whip finish right onto here. And then go ahead and trim our line. And now we're actually going to use just a little bit of Loctite or any kind of glue or whatever you prefer. Just put some right there on top of that thread we put down. And then we're going to use our rotary function here, turn it upside down, and then slide our bead onto that thread with the super glue on it and let it cure for a couple of seconds. And this is just to make sure that it's going to ride with the majority of the weight down to make the flat ride hook point up like we're hoping to, and turn it into a jig style fly, even though we're using a traditional nymph hook. So now we got it on there cured, and we're all good to go. Now we'll go ahead and start our thread back on there, right behind the bead. Might still be trying to cure a little bit, so we'll try to steer clear, but it should be good to go from here. Flatten out our thread a little bit. Just back it down the hook. Now once we get about to the point of the hook, we're going to take our Goose Biots. These guys can be a little tricky to work with. The trick is to just use two that are right next to each other on the strand of Biots. So we'll take this here. I'm going to just trim it so it's easier to get to and show you guys. So from here, kind of fan them out here. And we're just going to pick two that are right next to each other. And this will keep them all symmetrical with each other. So even if it's in the middle of a strand, just go ahead and we'll pick these two right here. Pinch them in there with one other finger. Go ahead and trim. Sometimes it's easier than others. And now, once you get them, you can kind of tell they have a little bit, sometimes they have a little bit of a curve to them. So what we're going to do is put them so the tips are curving away from each other. And that'll make a nice little tail on it. You can kind of see right there, they're curved with each other. We want them splayed away from each other. So put the spines against each other. Now you can kind of see that the tips are going away from each other. So we want to line them up beforehand and then set them along the back of the hook. Try to keep them symmetrical and everything. And we want them probably about half the length or 3/4 the length of the shank of the hook. Once we have them about there, go ahead and pinch them. And go ahead and secure them onto the hook. A couple of light wraps followed by some tighter wraps. From here, you can kind of adjust with your light wraps how you want them, pull them, adjust them. Once you get them how you want, just go ahead and really secure them on there. Wrap towards the bead. And then from here, we can go ahead and trim the excess. And really, these guys are the hardest part of the fly. Once we have those guys on there, we are going to go ahead and tie in our wire. Put that right behind the bead. Wrap down. all secured, we are going to use our UV brown eye stub as our body here. Just pull a little bit off. See, I have just a little too much here, so I cut that in half or so. Now from here, we're going to noodle it on there. When you noodle it, try to taper it so it's a little thinner at the bottom, right where you start, and it slowly gets thicker. Not make or break, but it definitely helps taper the body of the fly a little bit better. Once you got it, you can kind of slide that noodle all the way up to the hook. Now we can go ahead and start our wraps forward. Wrap all the way forward. We'll leave a little space right there behind the bead. And now I'm going to throw one whip finish in it to keep my thread from moving on me. Put my thread over here out of the way. Now I'm going to use my rotary function again and just wrap this wire forward, making a ribbing on it. Alright, now we got some segments and ribbing on there. We'll go ahead and tie off our thread. The easiest way to get this excess thread or wire off, just go ahead and helicopter it, pop right off. And now, going back to the biots, we'll make a couple little wings on the top of it. You can kind of see here, we want to pull two that are right next to each other. So we've kind of isolated these two right here on the end. Go ahead and trim these guys off. And on this one, we want the tips pointing away from each other, kind of like so. First, we're actually going to flip the fly over. This is how it's going to ride in the water. So we want these wings on the back of the hook. Because this one's going to be a jig, even though it's on a normal nymph hook, this is how it's going to ride. So we're going to try to tie these guys in like so onto the spine of the hook, or what will be the spine of the hook. With this, it can be kind of difficult, so we're just going to start with one at a time, do one or two loose wraps, kind of adjust it how we want. So you try to get this to about the bend of the hook or so. Get one in, we'll get the other one in right now. Kind of cross them. It's easier to adjust and get them lined up, make them look like wings. Get them right about to the bend of the hook, and now let's have those guys secured. Get a couple of tight wraps on them, and we'll go ahead and trim the excess. Clean this area up, cover it up with some thread. And now, just before we finish off the fly, we're going to add a little collar of our Peacock eye stub right there to cover up our thread wraps right behind the bead. This just adds a little more color to it. Again, pull a little much, so we'll cut it down. This stuff we don't need very much because we're just going to do a little collar right behind the bead. So this stuff you can go pretty sparse with behind. Couple more wraps. Try to cover up all that red thread. Well, it's okay to have a little hot spot between that collar and the bead, but you don't want a lot of thread there. Once you get that guy in and all secured, we're going to throw a couple whip finishes in this. Throw them in right behind the bead. Do those guys. We'll do a couple more just to keep them secure. And then we'll go ahead and trim. And that is your PsychoPrince with the Insta-Jig bead.